Well, today is a very exciting day because this has been a long time coming. Rose Booth is here with me on the show. Rose, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Molly.
So we got connected like 6 months ago through mutual friend Joy Agritreed. And
Yes.
congratulations, you just released your first book, Dancing in the Valley, Finding Life and Joy Amidst the Shadow of Death Nipping at My Heels. And just thank you for sharing your story in this printed form. And so I'm just so excited to get to know you more today and introduce you to the Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder community. So let's do what all my guests do and start off by having you give us the Rose 101. So tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
Wow. So that's a long answer, Molly, but we'll try to make it short. So I'll say what I'm doing currently, and then I'll kind of give a little background. Currently, I do a lot of things that I never thought I'd ever get to do. Wrote a book, which is one thing. I also co-host a podcast called One Single Thought. I'm very, very active at my church. I work there one day a week, and I work with the communications and discipleship pastor. I'm involved in our women's ministry. I help co-lead that. I lead discipleship groups. I teach a ladies' Bible study on Sunday mornings, co-teach that. I would live on the church property if I could, I think. But the Lord has been very gracious and has blessed me immensely. And I say that without anyone knowing. If you don't know my story, you probably would think that's a good place to be in your life. So you've had a really good life. And what people don't know is I'm a right above knee amputee. And from 2019 to 2022, I had 14 surgeries. I faced death 3 times, had 2 heart caths, a heart attack, more than a year in the hospital and rehabs, and eventually losing my leg. But I will say that probably the worst time of my life, God used to make my dreams come true, because before all of this, I was working a job I adored, 50, 60 hours a week. I managed a sales team as well as a sales support team, and I loved it. And I was active at church, and then my life was busy and full, and everything was great. And then in 2019, I got sick, ended up in the hospital, and my life just completely took an about face.
Well, you share your story so vulnerably in your book, and I love people who are willing to just get real and vulnerable and get down into the depths of the grief and the pain of life, while also simultaneously talking about the joy and the living in that tension, because that is life. And that is the beauty and brutality of life, is that both and I would love to actually go back because one of the things that I love that the way you open your book is you talk about kind of what your life itself was marked by, and how you were marked by loving parents who were married for 18 years, experienced multiple miscarriages, and and so like you in and of yourself were a miracle from the get-go. So would you share a little bit of that story?
Sure. My parents were married at a young age. They were 19 and 21.
Yeah.
And they really, of course, wanted to have children. My dad was a veteran of World War II, so they were like, they met through writing letters to each other. So they were the picture, World War II, romance.
Yeah.
So of course they tried having children, and my mom suffered 3 miscarriages. Then she was pregnant in 1963, 64, and they thought this is going to be it. And she went into labor, I believe, when the baby was 5 months. Went to the hospital. The baby was born. It was a boy. He lived about 4 or 5 hours. But because of medical technology in 1964, his lungs had not developed, and we didn't have the technology then. If he had been born today, he would have lived.
Yeah.
So after his birth and after he died, the nurses came in and said, we need to have a name to put on the certificate. And my parents chose to name him after my dad.
Mm.
And the nurse said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And they both said, this could be the only child we ever have. We've waited 17 years. And so the doctor, which back in those days, general practitioners, family doctors, they did everything, right? They delivered babies, they took care of sickness. And he said to my mom and dad, "You get out and try. Keep trying. Don't give up."
Mm.
Which is pretty progressive for the 60s.
Yeah.
So they did. And 4 months later, she got pregnant with me.
Mm.
And it was, she had no showers. They didn't buy anything. They borrowed. My crib was borrowed. My high chair was borrowed.
Yeah.
They just didn't think that this would come to pass.
Yeah.
So, I was told from a very young age, as long as I can remember, you're a miracle. You're a gift from God and you're a miracle. I often sometimes think about my brother. I would have loved to have had an older brother. But I often think sometimes that his life was a sacrifice for me to be here. Because I'm pretty sure my parents, if they'd had gotten one child, they would have been satisfied after all
Mm.
they had been through. And so, because my brother didn't survive, I was born. So I've always had a different perspective on life because I know that this was a miracle. And according to all medical science, my mom and dad probably shouldn't have ever had children.
Yeah.
And so here I am.
Yeah. And so when you come into the world under such circumstances where you are, you're, just so wanted, especially anybody who's ever experienced miscarriage, knows that pain and child loss is so painful. I mean, I've experienced 2 late pregnancy losses and, it's really painful. And it reminds you of what a miracle life is and what a miracle a child is. And, but I can imagine for your parents in particular, like, you share in the book that they were Christians, but to welcome you into the world after all those years, like 18 years of marriage, is a very long time before you have your first child. And especially in the 60s, like if they had gotten married at what, you said 19 and 20,
19 and 21. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yes.
like
My mom
your
was
parents were also like,
37.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, so my mom, funny enough, like my mom was 38 when I was born. Which, like that is like more common now, but back in the 60s, and I was born in 85, like that was pretty unusual for first children to be born, when a parent is late 30s or early 40s. That's just almost unheard of. But when and I almost just wonder, like, you being so wanted and prayed for and just something, I can only imagine the conversations and the prayers that were shared between your parents for all those years. And I don't know if this was a conversation you ever had with them. Like, did you ever have a conversation about, were they aware that they were dealing with infertility issues? Like, did they have the vocabulary for that at the time? I mean, maybe this is an ignorant question that I just genuinely don't know. But like, I just feel like I've never really heard of people who were born in the 50s and 60s, like openly discussing if their parents had infertility issues.
Yes. No, they really didn't talk about infertility like we do
Right.
today. I just think in that time frame, in those days, there wasn't enough medical advancement to know that it was
Yeah.
infertility, right? Or to figure out. I
Right.
mean, there wasn't the tests that they can run today.
And
Interestingly,
like
though,
not
we
to,
never.
not to like be like TMI, but like it's not like
Yeah.
contraception was that common either.
Right.
So like clearly 18 years, I can imagine your parents loved each other very much, if you get what I'm
Yes.
saying. And like for
Yes,
them
they
to not
did.
really, yeah. And so like
Uh-huh.
that's just one of those things where you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine in a time when infertility is not really talked about, and they're in a loving marriage where they're like I can only imagine the conversations they had with God of like, why haven't you given us a child yet? Like that is, oh my goodness.
Hmm. When I was cleaning
And
out some
sorry,
stuff.
didn't mean to cut you off.
Yes, yeah. So I was cleaning out some stuff quite a few years ago, and both my parents are gone now. And I found in a book, it was a little commitment card from like
Mm.
1957. So that was 10 years. They would, at that point, they would have been married 10 years. And it was a commitment card. I guess our church did some kind of thing about committing to pray for your children. And so this was like a
Mm.
card stating they would pray for the children that the Lord would give them, which was such a precious thing because I can't imagine, like you said, in those days. I mean, had I been born typical time frame, I would have been considered a baby boomer. This was post, World War II, lots of babies being
Yeah.
born. Now I actually fall in the Gen X, area. But, I think that I really wish as I have gotten older, my mom passed when I was 35. But I wish I had asked her more about, tell me how you were feeling. Tell
Mm.
me what you all, what it, how was that struggle? I think when I was younger, it just didn't hit me until I got older. Um, I know mom felt like it was her fault. I do know that we had talked about that. Like she felt at fault. And of course, my dad was like, no, it's not your fault. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like going through something like that. And I think about being in situations where, probably seeing babies being born just was like another stab in the heart. And I don't know, it's something that I can really get consumed by thinking on because when I talk to people and I talk to women who are struggling with infertility and they say, well, we've been married 2 years or whatever. And I'll just very calmly say, well, my mom and dad were married 18 years, and their mouth drops, and
Mm.
and they're like, "What?" And on top of that, adoption was not accessible in the 60s
Right.
either. So
Yeah.
their option to try to adopt internationally was not even talked about. Domestic was so expensive, and so, that wasn't even something in their will where they could even afford to do that if they wanted to. So
Yeah.
it's just, it was a different time. Medical advances weren't at the level they are now. Accessibility for adoption wasn't there, which again, I think the Lord wanted me here. Had they been able to adopt, maybe it wouldn't have been me. They would have had another child another way. But it really it has always put my life in perspective. And you mentioned how, a child comes that is so wanted, so much, so opposite of what you would expect. My parents were not super hoverers over me. For
Mm.
someone who's an only child and someone that they waited so long, their philosophy was, we're older. We're not going to be here our whole life. You need to make a life for yourself, and you need to make a life with others and make sure you have a family. I'm
Yeah.
single, never married. And so my friends and my church are my family. And they taught me that from a really young age. The last decision that they actually really made for me was opening a bank account when I was in high school. After
Mm.
that, college, buying cars, all those things, I would go to them for counsel, but they never came to me and said, you need to go to this school for college and you need to buy this car. Never, never. And
Mm.
very unusual, because typically when you've waited that long for a gift, you really want to just cover over that gift. And I'm not saying they weren't loving and protective, they were, but they
Yeah.
definitely did not operate like I would say many parents would. But I think it was because they both knew that I was a gift from the Lord. And I would think of my mom a lot when I read the story of Hannah, who prayed and prayed and prayed
Yeah.
for a child and then gave him back to the Lord. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the picture I get when I think about my mom specifically.
Yeah. And what a beautiful picture and I think your life, especially reading through your story and knowing what I know, is a testimony to that,
Hmm.
of this steadfastness within you, and grit and tenacity. Well, so I think, again, like I was saying, I think when you are born into circumstances like that, it gives you a perspective on life and the miracle of life in such a unique way. And so I think that makes for a good kind of transition to, some of what you shared in the beginning, in that, you know, you over the last 5 years have gone through a lot of, more than what a lot of people are going to face in a lifetime, concentrated in a pretty short amount of time, relatively
Yes.
speaking. And so obviously, I mean, don't want you to have to rehash all of it, but kind of just, share your story. I mean, I obviously, spoiler alert, you are an amputee. But how you got there, and, what that was like for you, as, you were in a really, a, not to borrow from the title of your book, but you were in a valley for a significant period of time, but how you have come out on, and I don't know, if would you say you've come out on the other side of it, or if you are kind of still walking the upswing out of the valley, but you're able to praise and to worship and to give glory to God in all you're doing, in the midst of the pain,
Mhm.
literally and spiritually.
Yes. So November 14th of 2019, I woke up. Well, I had it all night long, but my right hip was killing me. I just couldn't get comfortable. And I'd been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in 93 and had had a left hip replacement at that point. To kind of bring you up to speed, those that are listening, that I had a lot of issues starting around the age of 5 or 6. And, looking back now, I probably had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, but that was not diagnosed
Mhm.
at that time.
Yeah.
So, was diagnosed with RA in the early 90s, had a left hip replacement, was on medication, doing great. Had this, pain in my right hip and ended up going to the ER. I was in just tears. What ended
Mm.
up happening is I had septic arthritis. So I was septic, and that was the first time that I faced death in that time period. I just remember sleeping a lot. I remember my friends, my family, friends that are like family, praying for me that God would not take me. Um, so through all of that, the plan was to get a hip for my right hip, get a hip replacement. But the infection was so severe that they had to put in what's called an antibiotic spacer, and I would have to
Mm.
be bedridden and go through 6 weeks of antibiotics, then off 2 weeks, and then they come in and do the hip, which is what they did. They tried cleaning it out, didn't work. So came back in January of 2020, to get what I thought was going to be my hip, and the infection was still there. And that was when had very much been a Christian Pollyanna. I always saw the bright side, even through the first 2.5 months of this journey. I was like, it's going to get better. It's going to get great. I'm going to survive. It's going to be wonderful. And that surgery was the breaking point for me as far as my walk with the Lord. I began to really wrestle at that point. I felt like Pollyanna died, and I didn't understand why this was happening. Because what that meant is I had to have another 8 weeks bedridden. So essentially, I was bedridden for 4 months.
Yeah.
Then the pandemic hit, which adds a whole other dynamic to this story.
Whole other layer.
Yes. So right after the pandemic started, I got my hip at the end of March. My doctor made sure that I was considered an emergency case. And then I went back to rehab and started the work of learning to walk again, all while in a mask, all while being isolated from anybody that could visit me. Not even drop things off, because if you remember the beginning of the pandemic, we thought, COVID was being spread by boxes, things on the boxes.
Oh, we were so adorable. People would wash their groceries.
UPS guys were like stripping down before they went in their house.
I know.
So if anybody even wanted to drop something off to me, it would have to sit for 2 or 3 days. So that was really tough. I was there until the middle of May of 2020, came home. And after I'd had the hip replacement, the doctor said to me, he said, in the surgery, we had a really tough time manipulating your right knee. So what had happened, I'd been off my RA medication, and my right knee had kind of fused in 4 months being in the bed. He goes, you really need to look at a knee replacement. So I could barely bend it once I was up and learning to walk. But literally, I was learning to walk all over again.
Yeah.
Came home in May, had not been home in 6 months. I really hit a pit at that point as well. I really struggled with, I don't know, am I a believer? Does God really love me? Is he really here? Because I have lived my life serving him. What is going on? And I had a lot of wrestling at that time. That's really where I hit rock bottom. And I knew in my heart, I'm like, I know the Lord loves me. I know I'm a follower of Christ. I know that. But why does this why am I not getting ahead? Why am I not making progress? And so then we proceeded to, work towards getting a knee replacement. Let's get that taken care of. Then you can really rehab your hip better. I fought against battles of denial from insurance company. My health insurance said it wasn't medically necessary. Lots of denials. Finally, we got it approved beginning of August of 2020. And then the week before, I ended up in the ER with chest pains. And I had, after one heart cath where one cardiology team said it was gastro related, and a night of throwing up, TMI, throwing up, and just, I thought I was going to die. And I almost did. The second they called in another cardiology team, and I had a blood clot in my heart. So that was another unbelievable thing. Well, obviously, my knee replacement surgery had to be postponed. That was a real hit and a real blow. But my orthopedic surgeon said, you realize if you'd been on the table with a blood clot in your heart, what could have happened? So the Lord was gracious to make that happen. But I really did, at that time we were seeing a lot of people dying from COVID. I think that was pre vaccinations or anything. And I knew a couple people that had died of COVID. I knew a former member of our church who was then a pastor and was hit on the side of the road and killed. He had 3 young children, like all these people. And I really dealt with a lot of survivor's guilt. Like, why does the Lord keeping me here? Why? Why not me? Why me? Why am I the one why is he taking these people? So I struggled a lot with that. So I went through cardiac rehab, and I had to wait 6 months before I could go back for the cardiologist to evaluate if I could have my knee replaced, and I did. Had it worst knee that my doctor had ever seen. My patella bone was fused to my femur, so it was quite extensive. And I left there, went to rehab, and was doing great. I had made lots of progress. And the doctor had told them, be very careful with her knee because it was an extensive replacement. Don't manipulate it, be careful, all of that. And we were in the rehab gym, and the therapist was getting ready to push me across the way and did not put the pedals on the wheelchair, and my
Mm.
right leg jerked under my wheelchair. I don't think
Oh.
I've ever had a pain like that in my life. They thought that it was just, scar tissue breaking up. You'll be fine. I'm like, no, this is serious. So long story
Mm.
short, I ended up going back to my surgeon, and from rehab, I made the appointment, and he said, your patella tendon's torn. He could tell without even x-raying it. So a month to the day after my knee replacement, I had patella tendon repair surgery. Came home after that because the tendon had to heal before I could start rehab. And I just had a lot of issues with healing. It was not healing well. And so um, that was in March of 2021. And then in April of 2021, I had to go back in and have it cleaned out because the incision had dehisced and all of that. We battled throughout the next few months just trying to get the incision to heal properly. Obviously that poor knee had been cut in, and the tendons
Yeah.
are what sort of help heal and bring that skin together. So all this time I just had been crying out to the Lord that I just wanted to go back to my life. I just want to go back to my life. And finally in October of 2021, into September, 1st of October, I just prayed a prayer of surrender. I said, Lord, for almost 2 years, I have been asking to go back to my life. And I just got to let go of that. Like, I have got
Mm.
to surrender it all to you. And whatever you will, I've got to follow.
Yeah.
And the
And
next,
I think that question, I want to just pause real quick because I think
yep,
that
sure.
question of I want to go back to my life, of that or that desire is something that so many people feel when things are not going the way that they thought things were supposed to go.
Mhm.
Is, it's not, I think of that book by Lisa Turkhurst, like it's not supposed to be this way.
Right.
And it's, it's that whole idea of our plans, our agenda, and our desires. And when life happens, and when we are faced with suffering and tragedy, and when our plans are thwarted, we get to a crossroads where all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, this isn't what I pictured my life was going to be like. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Like, I did not sign up for this. Where in
Yes.
the contract, God, what did you say that this is what my life is going to look like? Okay. And it's that moment of where we have a choice, where we can run in the opposite direction. We can run for the hills, or we can run to the Father. And yeah, and so I love the way that you shared that, is that you getting to that place of complete and total surrender. And so that was in the spring of 2021, and then
That
but
was
I
the fall. It
know
was
that
the
things
fall.
the fall, but
Oh, yeah.
but the thing is that when we
Mhm.
get to that part, when we get to that moment of surrender, that doesn't mean that everything's going to then be fixed all of a sudden. And so, as we know,
Yep.
so you surrender, but then what happens after that in December?
Yes. So I surrender. I end up back in the hospital because I have an infection in that knee. So they have to take the knee out, put a spacer in like I had in my hip. So just between October and December, I went back in, had to get a spacer in my knee, um, got COVID while in the
Oh,
hospital and had to move to the
of
COVID unit,
course.
and then got the new knee. The new knee, the muscles just that because of the repair, and I've not been able to rehab those tendons, just couldn't hold it together. I looked like a murder scene. When I get from the
Mm,
go from the bed to the chair, blood everywhere. I mean, it was horrifying.
mm,
And they decided to try to do a muscle flap surgery, which takes part of your calf muscle, put it over top of the knee to strengthen it to help her hold it together. Did that. And after 10 days on a wound vac, they took it off and there was a hematoma and everything had opened up. And the doctor that did the surgery was not my orthopedic surgeon, it was one of his partners because the partner had had a lot of experience with doing a muscle flap. And so the partner was there looking after they took the wound back off, and he said, "Well, I don't think there's anything else we could do but amputate." And amputation wasn't even in my purview. I like that wasn't even an option in my mind. I thought people that lost their limbs were either diabetic, which I was not, or had accidents. And I was like, "What?" And so that was December the 12th, I believe. And my surgeon said, I don't want you to make this decision hastily. I want you to talk to people, talk to other doctors, and before you make the decision. Because he knew we both had been fighting for my leg for 2 years.
mhm. Yeah. And so to
So,
fight for your leg for 2 years only for it to just be cut off is like
yes,
almost,
exactly.
did it feel like defeat?
It did. It felt a lot like defeat. I battled with what if I have to do this and what's life going to look like? And then do I give up? Because I'm not a quitter at all. I'm very resilient. But this felt like I had lost the battle. And after much prayer and counsel from medical professionals, we went forward with it. But in the meantime, of course, it's now Christmas, and it was scheduled for New Year's Eve 2021. And I've not felt great since the muscle flap surgery, which I chalked a lot of that up to emotional stress.
Yeah.
But I couldn't eat. I didn't want to eat. I just didn't feel well, and I figured it was emotion. My body was catching up to everything I'd been through. And then the day after Christmas, that evening, I coded. I had a blood sugar of 10,
Mm.
and I woke up after they had done chest compressions and were wheeling me to ICU. I didn't know what had happened. Um, so it was determined I had an ileus, which is a gastric blockage, and it usually comes on because you're on a lot of pain medication. And because of the situation with my knee, they actually were giving me Dilaudid twice a day every time they had to change the dressing. And that just impacted me completely through my gastrointestinal system. So that was the third time that I almost died, and that one was pretty significant. Um, I don't I mean, I have bits and pieces that I remember, but my friends all told me that they thought for sure that I was not going to make it. They never let on to me. I was telling them I was ready to go. I told them, in fact, I argued and said I didn't want to have surgery, and they said, "You need to have surgery. You've got to get that leg off." And I said, "I don't want surgery. I'm going to go see Jesus, so I don't need the surgery."
Mm. Mm.
So is that those things were very vivid to me, and I remember laying there thinking, I'm ready to go. I'm scared about the transition. but I am ready to go. People would
And so
came, one
this
of our,
came Yeah. Well, I was going to say this came after that moment of surrender. Do you
yeah,
think that that was part of it? Is that because you had that moment of surrender that you were ready at that point for whatever God was going to bring you?
yes. I mean, it doesn't mean that I didn't struggle in those months following that prayer with, you know, questions or struggles, but I was a lot quicker to let go of those than I had been in the past. Up until that prayer of surrender,
Mm.
I had a real tight grip on my life. I loved my life. This was not the way it was supposed to go. And surrendering means that you acknowledge the fact that you're not God. And I
Right.
think all of us that live following Christ or not think I'm the boss of me, and I'm not. I determine my destiny, and that's not true at all. Um, Whether you follow Christ or not, God is in control. So I feel like I was still struggling, obviously, but I had a different kind of peace because I knew I had prayed to surrender completely, not to hold on to anything in this journey. I was weary, I was tired by that time. I was so tired. And so I felt like, you know, it was it was time to go. It was time to see Jesus. And in fact, after I got through the amputation surgery and crawled my way back up again, I was mourning and grieving, and there were people. A friend of mine lost her mom during that time, and her mom was septic, and all that came back to me because I was turning septic there, in ICU as well. My kidneys were beginning to fail, and I would think about her mom after when I was recovering. Her mom passed away. It went very
Mm.
quickly, and I was so jealous. Like, so I was like, Lord, why take her? Take me. Take me. I want to be with you. I don't want to be here. I want to be with you. So I had to work through a lot of that as well. The grief and the pain, um, of what I had lost, um, and that I just wanted to be with Jesus. I had been through so much that to me, being with Jesus was all I wanted.
So, you've shared so vulnerably and you share, I mean, you've just been through so much, and your faith is really inspiring. And so I would love for you to speak directly to the person listening
Hmm.
who maybe they are in that valley season now. Um, because what I think is in particular, or particularly so powerful about your story is, you have been through so much, and yet on the other side or on the upside, whatever, however we determined,
Hmm.
where you
Yeah,
were,
on the way
that
up.
the way that on the way up, because I mean, your story's not over yet. I know as of publication of your book, you're still, I mean, doctors told you were never going to walk again, and yet you've been fitted for a prosthetic, and you were using a walker, and would
Hmm.
love for you to share an update at the end of where you are now.
Hmm.
But specifically, I would love for you to share and just talk to the person listening who is in that season. They're in that valley, and they just feel hopeless. They just feel like they are trudging along. Um, so speak some encouragement to that, and then also just, for the people listening, like maybe you're not in that season right now, but the reality is like if you live long enough, you're gonna be there at some point. Um,
Hmm.
and so, maybe just file it away for for the day and the time that you're there. But yeah, would you just share some encouragement for those people?
Yes. When I look back over my life prior to this journey that I was on, I see how the Lord was preparing me. When you were in that valley, it was very hard for me to open up scripture and read the Bible. It was very hard for me to pray. And the Lord had kind of built a good foundation before then of spiritual growth and a rock solid foundation in Him. So I will speak first to those who are not in that valley right now. Get in the Word, spend time with the Lord, find that foundation underneath your feet solid. Because when that time comes, that's not the time to try to grasp onto something. If you're not ready when you walk into that, you're not going to get it while you're there.
Right.
But while you are in the valley, what is going to happen is, and I say this, and people that they're in the valley will be like, I don't believe that. God will grow you more when you're in the darkness than He ever will in the light. It's one of the only things that grows in the dark, and it's our faith. I cannot grow a plant worth anything. I love African violets. Those are probably the hardest thing to grow. Can't grow them. I killed a cactus, like a little small cactus. I can't grow anything. It's not my thing. I do have a plant now that's surviving, and that's great. But typically when when you're growing things, you've got to have a certain amount of light. You've got to water it properly and all of that. But when you're in that valley and you're in that darkness, you feel hopeless and helpless. But when you do begin to come out, and you will come out of it at some point, your faith is growing. In December 2019, and I didn't listen to the sermon until probably later in 2020, Matt Chandler, who's the pastor of Village Church in Texas, he was diagnosed with brain cancer in 2009. And they told him, you wouldn't live, you're not going to, survive to see your kids grow up. And, the Lord was gracious, and he's now a survivor. And so in December of 2019, he preached a sermon on just 10 years since he was diagnosed. And he made a statement that has stuck with me. He said, I miss being close to the Lord like I was when I was in the bathroom floor crying and weeping out to God, let me see my family live, and let me see my kids grow up and get married. He said, yeah, there are days now in the ease of life that I look back and say, I want that kind of relationship with the Lord. And although it is sometimes a tense relationship, when you're in the battle and you're wrestling, you're drawing closer. When you think about, I've been through a lot in this, I talk about this in my book, I've been through a lot of mergers, acquisitions, layoffs. And when you work with people and you go through difficult times in the corporate world, you all are like battle, soldiers together. And that's how it feels in the valley. You and the Lord are battling this together, and he's the one that's really ahead of you in the battle. And so if you're in that valley, the best thing to do is to surrender, which is the hardest thing, I think. And then to look to him to know that he knows what's best. One of my favorite verses is Psalm 139:16, and it says, before I was formed, this is a paraphrase, before you formed me, you wrote down everything in your book in my life. So God has already written everything. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but he already knows. And he knew that before I was even born. Even 18 years before my parents even married, he knew every detail of my life. And so what you're going through, and another favorite saying of mine is Charles Spurgeon. It says, remember, if divine love, if your circumstance, this is another paraphrase, if you think you should be in any other circumstance than you are now, divine love would have put you there. So if we think in the valley that we are where we're supposed to be because it's part of God's plan, then we know that this is ultimately going to work out for his good and his glory.
That's right.
In the valley, I used to update a lot of people via social media. It was just too hard to contact everybody, and I was getting lots of texts and calls, and my friends were fielding a lot. I would start, I would update on Facebook so everybody could see it, pass it along. And I always ended every post with God is faithful, God is good, and God is always right.
Right.
And I didn't always believe that when I was typing it out,
Mhm.
but I kept saying it so that I would believe it. And when you know the truth, you just have to keep repeating and speaking the truth back to yourself in order to so that your heart gets it and your whole self surrenders to it. Um, if you're in the valley, you probably don't want to hear Bible verses. You don't want to hear those things.
Yeah.
You just, it's like I don't want to hear that. Like, I know all of that. I've read the Bible. I know. I've read Job. I've read about Paul. But you're just in a place where you don't want to deal with it. And so, in a lot of ways, that valley is best traveled with you and the Lord. Because everyone else, no one knows how to really minister to you. They'll help you and they'll love on you, but the truth has to come from the Lord.
Right.
Um, and it's okay. It's okay for you to ask questions to the Lord. It's okay for you to be angry at the situation, but know that God is there.
Yeah.
And although at the time it didn't feel like it, I know looking back, He was there every step of the way.
Yeah. That's right. I think that's such a beautiful encouragement. And, I talk about this a lot too, just in my life and in my book, I talk about this too. It's just that benefit of hindsight, the gift
Mm,
of hindsight, uh, and it gives me perspective too in knowing that like God doesn't have hindsight. He just has
mm,
all this. And so
yeah,
for us, it's really hard in the midst of it because we don't have the hindsight. We don't have the all sight. But God does. And then, but I mean, I know I can't think of a single thing I've been through in my life where I can, look back and be like, gosh, that was wasted. When the reality is none of it was. And
hmm
I think that rings true in your story as well, is that none of what you have gone through has been wasted.
hmm
Um, I would love to keep talking to you. We're running out of time. I would love for you to just kind of update everybody on like, where are you now? And so, I know that, I even want an update from like, what's the latest
yeah,
after you hit publish on the book?
yeah. So physically, I still am, working on balance and walking and that sort of thing. The beautiful thing is I was able to qualify. I got a power wheelchair. So I'm able to be independent. I can go on our local paratransit and go anywhere I want to go. And that was unbelievable. Right around Christmas, I went to Target. I have not been to Target in probably 6 years. Went by myself. I didn't really even buy that much. I bought some gift bags and went to the Starbucks there and had a Starbucks, watched the people, and it was the best day ever. So I
Mm,
really definitely am thankful for the ability to be independent. I always keep in the back of my mind that, technically I shouldn't even be walking at all, but I do walk around the house some. The hit of the 3+ years of basically my body being decimated multiple times, the rheumatoid arthritis, and then being an amputee is kind of a triple threat. So my endurance isn't great, but I am able to function and live alone. And with help, people come and help me do certain things that I can't do. So I'm living a pretty active life. Uh, I'm in a PT right now. I finished PT July of 2022, outpatient, but I'm engaged right now, currently in a 8-week program with a local college. Doctor of physical therapy students are learning about amputees, and so I get free therapy, which is great.
That's
They about
great.
kill it. They about kill us all, but I survived. So, but that's good. And yeah, and so physically, that's where I'm at. Published the book the beginning of December 1st. Actually, we're recording this on February 1st. And so this is my 2-month book anniversary.
Yeah.
Loved it. Can't wait to write more, which I guess tells me that I'm excited about being an author. And so I've got ideas for other books, and would love to do a children's book. I had a small group of kids that are now second graders who prayed for me throughout that journey. They were kindergarten, 3 and 4 at the time, and they knew me, their family knew me. And so one of the little girls, Margaret, would always pray for Miss Rose Booth and her robot leg. And so Margaret, Zachary, and Hudson, all 3 of those have been little prayer warriors. And so I would love to write a book for kids on interacting with someone that has limb loss. And so that's something that might be the next project. I don't know yet. But yeah, I hope to eventually release an audiobook of reading my own book. And I think that's something a lot of people have asked if I would do that. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Like I said, I'm very active at my church, and so that consumes a lot of my time. And I also do a little freelance work for a startup company. Not a lot, but I do some. I don't foresee myself ever going back to work full time physically. I think it's just too demanding for me to work at the way I was before. Ideally, I would love to be able to drive with hand controls and get a van where I could be independent in that to that level. So I'm working with our state vocational rehab about that, and it's a long process, as most government things are. But maybe one day that might be something that a dream that can come true.
Awesome. Well, Rose, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story. And I will make sure to have links in the show notes for where you can connect with Rose and to get her book. And just thank you so much for all that you are putting out into the world, Rose. And thanks for sharing your testimony.
Thanks so much, Molly. It's been great.